So we are back at section 4.5 in your textbook, talking about 3 different types of loans. And the first thing I want to note is, this section and the writing in this section is very short, but I want to take a few minutes to kind of dig in a little deeper than what they're telling you in this textbook, because, in 3 paragraphs, they provide, just opening up a little tiny crack in the door to a vast array of options for financing businesses and governments. Okay, so there's 3 different general ways that loans can be repaid. One of them is called a discount loan, and that's where you pay the principal and all of the interest that has been charged for the whole duration of the loan at the end of the time period. And they note that this is the payment method of the U.S. government on T-bills, treasury bills. Now, you guys probably don't know what a treasury bill is, and I'm going to show you a wonderful website. To be honest with you, I use it all the time, because I'm always finding things I don't know about finance. There's this website called Investopedia, and if we just kind of go to their homepage, so this is the homepage of Investopedia, with news from the world of finance, and also education. And within the education section, there is a dictionary. And if you go into the dictionary and go to the letter T, you will see treasury bills, T-bills, where it explains what a treasury bill is. Okay, it's a short-term U.S. government debt obligation backed by the Treasury Department with a maturity of 1 year or less. The thing is, though, right, this is not the only type of loan or the only option for loans where you pay off the principal and all the interest at one time at the maturity date. You can package loans as a small business, as a corporation. Banks have some flexibility in how they do loan repayments. For instance, one of my clients was building a new convenience store. He needed to borrow a couple $1 million to do that. And then what they were going to do is, once the store was built, then they were going to pay back that whole loan with all the interest, and then refinance the building at a lower rate. Right, so that's one of the ways that you can do this kind of discount loan that your book discusses. Right, so it's not only for T-bills. Interest-only loans are very common, not only in the bond market, but also for many different types of business loans, small and large business loans. So you take an interest-only loan, and then you pay back the final payment when you have the money, or when you are obligated to do so with the arrangement with the bank. Again, the bond market is something we might go into in a little bit more detail later on in this course. I'm not sure that we're going to have time. If you guys are super interested in it, I'll do it. But interest-only loans are the payment method for the bond market. And just briefly, again, you can go over to Investopedia and look up, bonds generally, and they'll talk about all sorts of details with bonds. Bonds are basically a way for governments and corporations to borrow large amounts of money and allow lots of individuals to take part in lending the money. If a government needs several $100 million, no bank is necessarily going to be willing to do that kind of a loan, and so a bond is a way to securitize the ability to provide debt financing for businesses and governments. And then the last category of loans is what they call an amortized loans, and this is kind of what you are more comfortable, or what you might be more familiar with. This is what you're looking at with a car payment, with a mortgage, where basically you take out a loan for the amount of whatever it is that you're buying, and then with equal payments every period, every month maybe, you eventually wind up paying off both the principal and the interest on the loan. Okay, so let's run through this example. Okay, and what we want to do is we're going to look at these three different ways of paying back a $25,000 loan with an 8% interest rate. And we're going to calculate what the total of all the payments adds up to, as well as how much interest actually winds up being paid over those 6 years. Okay, so in all cases, it's going to be $25,000 of principal. Now, one thing I want to note is when you're talking about a loan, right, the principal is the present value, right? If you're borrowing a certain amount of money, that money is given in today's dollars, right? So our principal is precisely our present value for these calculations, and the rate is going to be 8%. And that's going to be the same for each of these different ways of calculating our total payments, right? So total payments and total interest for a discount loan, all that means is you're taking $25,000 and you're bringing it up 6 years in the future at 8%. So you just take and do your future value calculation with the rate, and let's see, 6 periods, and payment was 0, and the present value. So we'll take this as a negative, so we'll calculate properly, and there it is. So we've got $39,671 that we'll have to pay back at the end of 6 years, all in one lump sum, right? So again, the tricky thing there is just to realize that the principal is the present value. It's today's dollars. Now, to calculate the second type, let me copy this. This is example 2. We are calculating for interest as you go, interest only loan. All right. So this one is a little easier, right? All you need to do is figure out the annual interest. All right, so that's just 8% times your principal, $2,000, and then the last payment is the principal plus that year's interest. Which is 25 plus 2, right? And then the total outflow for this loan was 6 times the interest payment. So we're paying those interest payments every year, plus the original principal of the loan. And there it is. So you're paying $37,000 for an interest-only loan. Okay. So discount loan cost you $39,000. Interest-only loan costs you $37,000, and the reason for that, of course, is that when you are accumulating your interest, that gets added to the principal, so you're paying interest on an ever bigger number. Okay, our third example of how a loan can be paid off is the one that consumers would be most familiar with, and honestly, this is kind of where I live when I'm doing budgeting, cash flow projections, financial projections for banks, for financing for businesses. You have to make amortization schedules, because the thing is, right, when you're making payments on a loan, part of that payment is interest and part of that payment is principal. And so you have to be able to calculate what's the amount of interest, because interest expense is subtracted from revenue to go into your net income calculation or your profit calculation. but the cash flow is the actual payments. And so, this is one of those very important examples of when cash flow and some of our net income calculations are not the same thing. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So the present value. So the present value of the loan, or the principal, is that $25,000 as before. And we need to figure out the payment that will give us a present value of $25,000 over 6 years at 8% interest. Okay, so how much do we need to pay every year, and then how much of that is interest and how much is principal for this loan in this kind of a scheme? Okay, so the way that you do that is you use the payment function. That's really what we'll do. Okay, so our rate is 8%, and our number of periods is 6, and our present value is negative 25,000. And I can tell you now that there's a typo in there, but we'll run this through because I'm in the middle of the calculation, and then I'll fix my mistake. Okay, it's going to give me a payment of $200,000, so we know why that's a problem, right? It's 8%. There we go. So it's 5407 is our payment, which is precisely what is calculated here. Now it's a little laborious, I'd say, to calculate the total interest expense. What you have to do is calculate the total payments, which is your 5407 times 6, right? And then you subtract the present value. And so that gives you the total interest over the life of the loan. Okay. So this is the 3 ways to pay off a loan. Okay. And you are going to have a homework problem that has you calculate those. The next thing I want to talk about are what we're calling amortization schedules. Okay, so an amortization schedule, an amortization table, and this is how you set up a table. You start with your beginning principal, you have your payment, calculate the interest portion of the payment, how much there is left to reduce the principal, and that gives you the remaining principal. That then flows down into your beginning principal. You still have that same payment. The interest is going to be that 8% times the beginning principal. Subtract the interest amount from the payment to give you the reduction in principal, and that gives you your remaining principal, right? This obviously can be easily done in Excel, and what that allows is for every year then, or every period, you'll have your interest expense given separately, which then can go into a financial model for a budget. So remember from everybody's favorite Module 2 last semester in 214, right, where you were doing those big complicated budgets? To go into your cash flow budget and into your income statement budget, you need to have your interest expense broken out. And so if you take my upper level finance course, I'll show you how to incorporate an amortization table into a pro forma financial statement model. Okay, so let me just quickly run through how to create a amortization schedule. All right, so the first thing you do is just have these column headers as they are. So our beginning principal is that 25,000, and our payment, the payment you have to calculate separately. So you set up, when you're doing these, you set up an input area just like we typically would, where you have the number of periods and the principal amount and whatnot. You calculate your payment first before you can make an amortization table. And so the interest is going to be the 8% times the beginning principal. Whoa. And then to get to the principal reduction, what you do is take your payment and subtract the interest portion of the payment, And then to get to the remaining principal, you subtract that 3,400 or whatever you wind up calculate from your beginning principal. And then your beginning principal the next year is what you started with. And everything else, my friends, if you make the right kind of absolute cell references, right, you can just go ahead and copy this across and down. That one should work. That one will work. So let's see if this works. Pull that down like that. Yep, and now I can pull the whole thing down for 5 more years, right? And you wind up with a 0 remaining principal. So that, my friends, is an amortization table. Know it, love it, live it, be it. You will find this to be tremendously useful in your life as a financial analyst. Okay, so we're going to end there and just do these last couple of sections in the next video.